Species. Unite.
You ask what kind of army we are. Cleveland Amory once said it. He said, the army of the kind. And that's it. If there's anything going on, we find it irresistible not to speak out, to do something, to say something, to enlist other people to help. Because we're not, some superhuman force. We're a collection of humans.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Novogratz. This is Species Unite. We have a favor to ask. If you liked today's episode and you have a spare minute, could you please rate and review Species Unite on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts? It really helps people to find the show. This conversation is with Ingrid Newkirk. Ingrid is the president and founder of People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA. PETA was founded 44 years ago in 1980, and Ingrid just celebrated her 75th birthday. So we got together to look back on her life and the life of PETA. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
It's a big birthday for a big life. And it's a great time to look back on all that you've done for animals and for a lot of people as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you. It's very kind.
So why don't we start with your life way back in the day when you still ate animals and weren't really paying attention yet to all this stuff, and how it all started and what the first seeds were that got planted in your head that there was a different way.
Well, I always say that I am the poster child for slow learning. And that's what gives me patience with other people, because if I could change, anyone can change. I had my first fur coat when I was 19. I had a fur collar before that. And I loved animals. You know the thing, I love animals. I loved animals. My family loved animals. We ate our way through the almost entire animal kingdom while we loved them. My father was a gourmand, and so he liked things like calves' brains on toast. He would have my mother make organ meats, which stunk up the house. He took me out onto the rocks in Cornwall, and we would pick mussels and bring them back and de-beard them and eat them with vinegar, and so on. So liver and onions is one of my favorite things. If you talk to me now about it, I just saw a film called Kind of Kindness, where the woman cuts out her liver and it's on the floor. And it reminded me of that is what I used to eat with mashed potatoes. What was wrong with me? How thick was I? So I always thought it was just a few animals treated wonderfully, comfortably, in science that would save our lives. All these illusions were shattered because as I learned, and I'm sorry to say, one thing at a time, then I changed my habits. So I found a little pig on a farm when I was a law enforcement officer who had been left behind with other animals. They had all died except this little pig. And he was just an adorable angel. And I held him in my arms. He was just little grunting sounds. I took him out to the water pump and I cupped my hands and allowed him to drink. And he hadn't had anything to drink in so long. And then as I was going to prosecute those people for abandonment and cruelty, it occurred to me on the way home that I was going to have pork chops for dinner. And I thought, what is wrong with you? You know that whoever that pork chop was didn't have a nice death, probably didn't have a nice life. I didn't know about factory farming then. Everyone knows now. And so bit by bit, I discovered a fox and a squirrel in a steel trap set behind a convenience store. That was the end of the fur. I read Peter Singer's book, Animal Liberation, back, late 70s, and thought, oh gosh, well, there go my Baswegian favorite leather shoes, because it's not just the inside of the cow, it's the outside too. I don't want to be part of that. So since then, I went to slaughterhouses, I went into laboratories and saw abject horror in some of the finest so-called labs in America, in Washington, D.C., and Bethesda, Maryland, the government labs, hideous. And I went to India and I saw where leather comes from, the tanneries, the slaughterhouses there that export leather. So bit by bit, I've had my eyes open to absolutely almost every horror that you can imagine.
Yes.
What have I been doing? I mean, I'm supposed to love animals. And you don't have to love them, as Peter Singer says. You just have to have some decency, some compassion, some respect, and not torture and kill them.
I asked Peter this, but I would love to ask you, because you read his book when it came out back in the day when really the world didn't know about factory farming. His book was really an expose for so many people, where now that feels weird to people because so many people grew up, even if they don't pay attention to it, they know it exists. Was it shocking when you read it?
It was, because again, I loved animals. And I was actually running the DC, what was called then the DC Dog Pound. I was the pound master. And my life revolved around taking in animals that nobody loved, that had been abused, that were unwanted, and doing my best to look after them and to get them spayed and neutered and all that sort of stuff. I had become a vegetarian because of a friend of mine who worked at the Animal Welfare Institute. And she had shown me once when I was eating a steak sandwich what happened to pigs. And I couldn't believe it. I was so horrified. So I'd become a vegetarian. But then one day a man walked into the shelter and said, "Are you putting milk in your tea?" And I said, "Yes, it's condensed milk. It's got sugar in it. It's really nice." And he said, "But you don't eat veal, do you?" And I said, "Of course not. I haven't eaten veal since I was 7. My mother would never have veal in the house because of veal crates." And he said, "Well, do you know why this veal?" And of course, he told me the whole scenario of taking the calves away from the mother. That's as far as I had got. I just thought, you have to be kind. Then I read Peter Singer's book, and my eyes were really open because I thought, gosh, they aren't just others that you're kind to. They're you. I saw a bumper sticker on a car and it said, "I'm you, only different." And that to me was it. They are me, only physically, in communication, in some ways different. But they're me. So the golden rule applies to them. They feel and think and do all the things, probably many of them better than I do. And we're not superior. We're just what Roger Fouts called one instrument in the great orchestra of life. So thank you, Peter Singer, for that book. And so we formed People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals based on Singer's book to say animals are not ours to eat, to wear, to experiment on, to use in entertainment, or in any other way. They are not ours.
When you formed PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, what was the original idea? Like, were you going to be investigators? Were you going to be advocates? What was the plan in the very beginning?
Well, the plan was this. I had seen inside a lot of places where animals are abused and no one ordinarily goes there. That's the slaughterhouse, the factory farm, all those places, the laboratory. And I thought, well, if I grew up loving animals and I hadn't a clue what was going on behind all these closed doors in these far off places, then no one else does either. So I thought, why don't we start a group? And I was thinking local. I was in Washington, D.C. Start a group and we will show people what's going on, but we will also make sure they know which vegetarian options they have locally, where they can buy a shampoo that isn't tested in rabbits' eyes, what place sells cotton and corduroy and those kinds of things. I mean, the choices were so minimal. There were so few things you could do, but if you cared, you could do it. And so we thought we'll make it as easy as possible for people to make those kind choices. And so we started out, and our first case that made international news, national, international news, was the Silver Spring monkeys case of the monkeys in that dingy, dirty, filthy warehouse in Silver Spring. That made the front page of the Washington Post.
Will you tell that story for people who don't know it?
Well, I think until the Silver Spring monkeys case, it was clear that scientists said no one else had any right to tell them what to do. They were above any criticism, above that lay people were just dirt, basically. So unless you had a science degree and you knew you couldn't say anything. And we broke that apart. I had been in laboratories myself at the Bethesda Navy Research Institute, at the National Institutes of Health, and I was just sad. I was upset. I had seen a chimpanzee in a little cage barely bigger than herself, and the experimenter who was taking me through had said to me, "Oh, she has it better than me." And I thought, this is just so wrong. So I formed PETA with Alex Pacheco, who had never been inside a laboratory. And I said to him, "Why don't you have a look?" So we got the list of USDA labs that were registered, picked the one nearest my apartment. He went and knocked on the door and asked for a job. They said, "Don't have one, but you can volunteer if you like." So he did start volunteering in this lab. And I call it a lab because under that description, they had received $1 million in federal funding, but it was really a dingy warehouse down a side street in the middle of nowhere near the leaf mulch dump. And he found all these monkeys, 17 of them. They had been imported from the Philippines. They were in cages barely bigger than their own bodies with rusted wires that were broken off, that they were injuring themselves on. They had had their backs opened up by a psychologist, not a veterinarian, nobody with any medical training, and the nerves cut to their arms. And then this man, Edward Taub, would stick them in a little snack refrigerator that he had converted into an electric shock chamber and try to force them to use their bad arms to pick up raisins out of a tray. There were garbage cans that were full of monkeys who had died in that lab of gangrene, still with the bandages around their arms. It was just everything you could imagine was wrong. And so I knew how to put together a case. I was a cruelty investigator, so I did. We went to the police. They served a search warrant. All the monkeys came out into the sunshine. It was a wonderful day. We had a place ready for them to be kept during the pendency of the trial. And Edward Taub was charged with 17 counts of cruelty to animals. It was a very convoluted case. It took a long time, but it woke everybody up to the fact that you can look inside and maybe there is something you can do. And one of the things that had happened is we found out the United States Department of Agriculture, which, inspects laboratories, I use that word loosely, had never been in the back to see the monkeys. They had only sat and had coffee with the secretary in the front of the office and taken their word for how many animals and how they were kept and left. And that's how they did their inspections. So that had to change.
So this made the front page of the Washington Post.
Several times, because the initial raid made the front page. Then, of course, the trial, all the ups and downs. Researchers who use animals came from all over the United States to stick up for Edward Taub. They'd never been in the lab. They had no idea what his experiment was, but they came to defend him. And each one fell flat on their face when the prosecution said, "Have you ever been in the lab? Do you know what they do?" And they would say things like, oh, yes, cockroaches, of course, they're an ambient source of protein for monkeys. And oh, yes, of course there'd be filth in the cages. Monkeys are filthy. And they were just taken apart. So Traub was convicted. He then appealed. He was found not guilty because of a technicality in the law. What the judge said is that a federally funded researcher, someone getting money, our tax money, from the NIH and these other places, is exempt from state law. And so they threw the case out. And then there were other things where we fought for the custody of the animals. The law was changed in Maryland, and it kept making the headlines. Even 60 Minutes Australia did a piece about it.
Because this was such early days, was this like, oh, wow, wait, we can actually create real impact as an organization? Is this kind of what like set PETA off into the world?
It is. It was so important because it showed you the power of the press. I mean, we're standing on a corner, handing out leaflets, talking to people individually, harassing fur wearers. And here it was making national and international news. And the joy was that bags of mail would come to us. They would somehow find us. I mean, how they found us, I don't know, but they would find us. Bags of mail with the magical words, what can I do to help? And we thought, well, you can stop eating animals, you can stop wearing animals, you can stop buying cosmetics that are tested on animals. The gamut of things that we were able to say to people, here's what you can do to help.
Yes. And shortly after that, I think, tell me if I'm wrong on the timing, but you also started doing protests with head injuries with animals. That was a big thing back then, dogs and pigs being used in car crashes, right, for cars. That wasn't too long after that?
It was a few years afterwards in two separate things. The Animal Liberation Front was very big then. They would give us videotapes anonymously. We never wanted to know, whether exactly who they were. But they would give us videotapes and photographs and documents from laboratories. And they were in the University of Pennsylvania head injury lab. And they removed 70 hours of videotapes taken by the experimenters themselves, showing them injuring the brains of these baboons and then mocking them, holding them up by one arm, saying things like, let's hope the anti-vivisection people never get hold of these tapes, smoking in their faces, using dirty instruments, having brain-damaged baboons in terrible shape, just drooling on themselves while they were being made fun of. Anyway, we got those tapes. We held a news conference. We edited them down so that they were showable, to people. You didn't have to sit through 70 hours. And the government came after us. The government wasn't interested in anything that the experimenters were doing, but the public was. Luckily, the public was horrified. Nobody would stop these experiments. So 101 kind people came with us to the National Institutes of Health, to the 8th floor, and we took it over, sat down, refused to leave. They turned off the heating to try to freeze us out. They turned up the air conditioning to try to freeze us out. They did everything they could, and we just stayed there for 4 days. We didn't move. People would send us food up in baskets from the window, and after 4 days, the head of HHS, Health and Human Services, she's gone now, but Margaret Heckler, we will always be grateful. She sent her aide 8 floors up the stairwell to come and talk to us, get the tape. She watched it and she stopped the experiments. So that was a wonderful day. That was that. And then, of course, we had the car crash tests, which was a whistleblower told us they were smashing pigs, General Motors, the whole lot of them, smashing pigs and baboons into a wall to test steering wheels. And we said, no, can't do that. Went to them. They wouldn't meet with us. Did everything we could. Escalated from just writing politely to chaining ourselves in auto showrooms to the cars. to eventually our donors giving us cars, old cars, and we set them on fire outside the auto showrooms. And then I think they thought, oh God, I have no idea what you're going to do next. So they acquiesced. And today you see crash test dummies instead of pigs and baboons all over the world. It's all gone.
The reason I'm so curious about the timeline with this stuff is I was a kid in the 80s. PETA always seemed like it existed. And you only started in 1980, but you were famous fast, right? Like you were very well known quickly because I remember you always.
And that was hard then because there was no internet, And in fact, fax machines were a big thing. When they came in, we thought, oh, look at this. We can send something quickly to someone else via fax. So, yeah, we knew we had to capture the press. And we're also, I always said, we're not in this to make friends. It's nice to make friends. But we're not here to win a popularity contest. We're here to fight for animal rights. And animals need all the help they can get. So we've never minded making fools of ourselves. We've never minded being mocked. We know we're right, and we know animals are just like us, and we know we have to say whatever needs to be said and done to stick up for them. And so that has lost us a lot of people. But we always say, look, if you don't want to donate to us, there are a lot of wonderful groups working for wildlife, to save them, to, whatever. There's somebody else you can support. But if you want to be edgy, you want to push the envelope, we're your guys.
And no one's had more impact than PETA in terms of numbers, in terms of change, in terms of laws. A very long battle that you had as an organization and a very big success was Ringling Brothers. That went on for how long?
Ooh, that went on for probably 30 years. We never let up. In the end, we were going to every single show, no matter where they were in the country, standing outside with our posters, with our videos, with our bull hooks, that long rod with the hook on the end that they jab the elephants with, usually under the elbows behind the ears where you can't see the wounds. And people would be so rude to us. Parents were often furious because they were bringing their children to a nice thing, and we're saying, children, please know that these elephants aren't volunteers. These animals don't want to be here, and they're trained very badly, and they're kept in chains. So it took a lot. In the end, their attendance had dropped because of all these shenanigans that were vital, but also because we were able to document the deaths of baby elephants in their custody. And when they were training those baby elephants who were so young, so fragile, not having the protection of their mothers, they would fall off a pedestal and break a leg. They would drown in a pool next to where they were being trained. All these things were happening. A lion went across the Mojave Desert in a circus train with no air conditioning and died of heat frustration. That was Ringling. So we went to the government and we said, here, we've got all these instances. You never do anything. You never take any action. And we sued them. The government went after them. And I think the accumulation of all these different things meant at some level, Kenneth Feld, owner of the circus, must have thought, we can't carry on. And so they disappeared. And now they're back, but with no animals at all human acrobats and fire eaters and all these wonderful volunteers who can go home and be with their family at the end of the day or can quit.
And don't have to stay in a cage when they're not working.
But they're not the only ones, I should say. I mean, the Universe Soul, we just won that. That was an uphill battle. And we're working on the Shriners. We've got some Shriner circuses to stop. They rent animals from sleazy places. Got that to stop. We're having all sorts of court battles with the Shriners, and they've arrested some of our people. And it's just a big mess. But in the end, we're going to win, and there won't be any animals in any circuses, no matter how small.
It's similar with with roadside zoos, and it's unfortunate that you have to kind of shut them down one by one or state by state, and you just can't wipe out the whole industry, in one fell swoop. You shut them down all the time.
We do.
But every time it's a huge battle.
Yeah, there are hundreds of them. It's funny, in the age of the internet and virtual reality and National Geographic specials, that there are still hundreds of these sleazy roadside zoos. But yes, we're shutting them down. We've taken away hundreds of animals: bears, lions, tigers, emus, exotic birds. Some of these bears, particularly, their teeth rot. And they've never had dental care, of course, or any other kind of veterinary care. They're kept on a cement slab in this tiny area, and all they do is pace back and forth, back and forth. There's no life at all. And if anybody opens their eyes, they'd see, I will not patronize this. This should not be patronized. But yes, a blanket policy would be much better. We just have to find a way to get one.
A lot of mainstream, just people in general, when they think of PETA, think of a lot of your tactics, what you do for press, and like the big moves. But I think a lot of people don't know like how many brilliant people are behind the scenes at PETA. Like we've worked with and talked to many of your scientists, lawyers. You're an army, right? And I don't think the general public has any idea what kind of army you really are and how many different battles are going on all at the same time for animals in labs, for roadside zoos, circuses, factory farming, dissection in schools. Like you're everywhere. And will you talk a little about the bigger picture of PETA?
Well, it's true that most people think, oh, you're the people who throw blood on fur coats or whatever they think. Our gimmicks are the ones, of course, that the press wants controversy. The press wants sex. They want conflict. So they want something funny. So we will give them all those things. That's why most people know about us. However, of course, behind the curtain, there are 19 scientists working on state-of-the-art alternatives to the use of animals, working with federal agencies, getting regulations passed to stop animals from smoking or from being injected with toxic chemicals, from being kept in laboratories for years in psychological experiments, where all they do is bang their heads against the side of the steel cages. They're working on that. We have lots of attorneys bringing litigation all the time, suing, even for the right to run an ad that tells the truth. Doesn't have to be gory, but tells the truth about what's happening to animals, so that it's not just, buy a turkey for Thanksgiving ad that's running. It's don't buy a turkey for Thanksgiving. Here's an alternative. We get locked out, and then we have to sue for the right to show a message of kindness. You ask what kind of army we are. Cleveland Amory once said it. He said, the army of the kind. And that's it. If there's anything going on, we find it irresistible not to speak out, to do something, to say something, to enlist other people to help. Because we're not, some superhuman force. We're a collection of humans. And that means that every single person can do something.
PETA has had many victories in the past 44 years, many, many. And at the same time, we are eating more animals than ever. There's more factory farms than ever, more slaughterhouses. Like the numbers, especially on farmed animals, are so out of control and devastating. That kind of paradox of like victory here, but global meat consumption is going to double by 2050. How do you manage that and think about that in your work?
Well, I guess a couple of things. And one is that, people say, there are only so many vegans in the world, the percentage. And I think, a lot of people don't say they're vegan, but they're buying vegan food. Even incidentally, they're having vegan meals. They might be having vegan meals 3 times a week. It's all there, all this, it's happening in various ways. The reason, of course, there's more meat is because there are more human beings. The population of the world is through the roof. So it's not a failure of veganism. It's a failure of population control. but everybody can make a difference. I really believe that it's not just a book title that I wrote. It's one can make a difference. Every single person, I ask them, don't just feed yourself vegan food. Feed your friends vegan food, your fellow vegans. Please identify people who are never going to try it.
And also I feel like we've always had solutions. We've never really had to do any of these terrible things to animals. But from the time you formed PETA in 1980 to now, 44 years later, the solutions that exist now are incredible. Not only in food and clothing and options like beauty products, all of that, but also in testing. We could be using drones instead of fireworks. Pretty much anywhere animals suffer, we have really modern, incredible solutions. When you started, they were pretty bleak, right? There wasn't a whole lot of exciting food. There wasn't a whole, you could wear canvas or, there weren't all these beautiful vegan leathers, right? How's that been to witness as you've gone through this?
It's phenomenal. It's amazing to me if anyone ever says, well, I wouldn't know what to wear. I wouldn't know what to eat. Have you looked? Because it's everywhere. With fashion, as you say, it's from the highest haute couture to something, what was Payless. We used to go and get our shoes there. It's just, you can have anything you want. If you just look, if you just ask, you go on the internet, it's all there. There is faux gras instead of foie gras. There is caviar instead of caviar. From the fish and chips, love fish and chips. There's Gardein filet of fish. It's just, everything is there for the taking. The world is full of choices, and you can be cruel or you can be kind in every single thing you do. I have to tell you, the composer, Philip Glass somebody said to him, Philip, it's awfully hard to find non-leather shoes. And he said, well, it's so much harder for the cows if you don't. And I thought that was just perfect. Is when people say, well, I'd never give up cheese. I'll show them a picture of the baby calf in the wheelbarrow being taken away from his mother and say, really? You won't do it for this little tyke here? You will break this little calf's heart and his mother's heart because you really can't give up cheese? There's vegan cheese, for God's sake. 8 varieties.
The vegan cheese has become amazing too. It's really come far. It's as good as anything. It's absolutely delicious. So on your website, you have 75 things you can do for your 75th birthday. Will you just give us a couple to close with so people can walk away and go do something right now?
Well, I hope people will go and look, because it's endless, and it's everything from, what you're doing with your cast-offs to your will, to if you know a child or you have a grandchild, somebody in school, your neighbor has a child. We have alternatives for dissection. We have cute videos about not cutting up animals in class. We talk about giving books about animals to libraries and to schools. But the big 3 are what you eat, what you wear, what you buy. Actually, it's 4, how you entertain yourself. And if you could but don't leave it with yourself. Engage someone else. All of us have made terrible mistakes in life that have hurt animals. We did it unthinkingly. We did it unknowingly. Me, the slow learner, I'm responsible for all sorts of suffering of animals, and I really regret it. So please bring somebody else. We have a lot of time to make up for, a lot of things we've done to make up for. Make sure you educate others. Never be silent. Always use your voice. Help people along so that their eyes can be opened too, and they can stop hurting and start helping.
Ingrid, thank you. It's true. Bring someone with you. Don't do this in a silo.
Right.
Thank you so much for this, and happy birthday.
Thank you.
To learn more about Ingrid and to learn more about the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, go to our website, speciesunite.com. We will have links to everything. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Species Unite. If you have a spare moment and could do us a favor, please subscribe, rate, review on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps people find the show. If you'd like to support the podcast, we'd greatly appreciate it. Go to our website and click donate. I would like to thank everyone at Species Unite, including Gary Knutson, Caitlin Pierce, Amy Jones, Paul Healy, Santina Polke-Link, Sam Kosel, and Anna Kalner, who wrote and performed today's music. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.